Oh, look what you did, you clumsy girl! I own 30% of this company. I will not be ignored.
The chandeliers above the Gramercy room glittered like 1,000 frozen stars, each crystal dangling, each one catching light, as if mocking those of us tethered to the ground. Money did that. It bent light, sound, and people toward itself. I had walked into this job before, but tonight the air felt heavier, like the whole room had been lacquered in arrogance. I smoothed my apron, pressed my notepad against my palm, and told myself what I always did. Smile, Monica. Smile like your rent isn't 3 weeks late. Smile like Mateo doesn't need braces. Smile like you belong here. Table 12, my manager hissed at me, jerking his chin toward the long mahogany stretch near the window. The Hale party. I knew even before I turned. Everyone did. Victor Hale, billionaire, real estate monarch, a man whose signature could shift skylines. Tonight he was holding court, and next to him, draped in champagne silk like she was born in it, sat Celeste Marrow. The girlfriend, the accessory, only she wasn't content being a diamond on his arm. No, she had sharp teeth hidden behind that glossed smile. I'd seen her before, just never this close. Breathe, I muttered under my breath, then pasted on the practiced grin and approached. Good evening, I began, the words smooth, professional. My name is Monica, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Victor barely glanced up, his hand already swirling a glass of Bordeaux as if time itself should bow to him. But Celeste looked at me, really looked, the way a cat looks at a mouse before deciding whether it's worth the pounce. Oh, she said, tilting her head. A waitress named Monica, that's quaint. The men at the table chuckled, a low ripple of amusement that spread like poison. My throat tightened, but I held the smile. I'd been here before. Not this table. Not this exact cruelty, but the humiliation was a well-worn coat by now. What can I start you all with this evening? I asked, pen poised. Celeste leaned back in her chair, the diamonds on her wrist catching the chandelier light. Tell me, Monica, do you ever get tired of it? Carrying plates for people who probably tip better than you earn in a week? The question wasn't really a question. It was theater. She was performing and I was the unwilling prop. I forced a chuckle, paper thin. I'm just here to make sure your evening goes smoothly, ma'am. Victor finally looked up. His eyes were cold, transactional. Order the sea bass, darling, he said to Celeste, and stop tormenting the help. But Celeste only smiled wider, emboldened by his half-hearted scold. She tapped a manicured nail against the menu. You'll forgive me, won't you, Monica? I'm just curious. You look like... Her eyes flicked over me, dissecting. You look like someone who had bigger dreams. Didn't you? What were they? Before the uniform, before the cheap shoes? Laughter again. This time sharper. My ears burned. In my head, I heard my mother's voice, soft but firm. Don't give them the satisfaction, Mia. You are worth more than their cruelty. But the room didn't care about my mother or my son or the ache in my spine after 10-hour shifts. It only cared about the spectacle. I'll have the sea bass, Celeste concluded, snapping the menu shut like a gavel. And I do hope you won't drop it. That would be tragic. I scribbled the order, fingers trembling just enough that I worried the pen would betray me. The others ordered quickly, casually. Steaks, lobster, wine that cost more than my rent. My smile held, but inside something small and furious began to take root. When I returned with the wine, Celeste wasn't finished. She never was. She leaned forward, eyes glinting. Tell me, Monica, do you have children? The question hit harder than I expected. I hesitated, and that was mistake enough. Her smile sharpened. Oh, you do. I can see it. A little boy, a girl. Isn't it difficult working nights while someone else raises them? Unless, of course, there isn't anyone. Unless the father. My chest tightened. Heat rushed to my face. Celeste, Victor warned again, though his tone was more bored than protective. But Celeste was relentless. I just wonder, Monica, when you tuck them in, if you even do. Do you tell them to aim high? Or do you tell them to get comfortable in uniforms and aprons like their mother? The table roared with laughter, but it sounded distorted, metallic like knives clattering on tile. My vision blurred for a moment. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shatter every glass on that table. Instead, I placed the wine gently in front of her. Steady hands, controlled voice. Here's your Chateau Margaux, ma'am. 2010. Poured to perfection. Her smirk faltered just a flicker as if she realized I hadn't broken. Not yet. But inside, oh God, inside I was broken. Humiliation settled into my skin like a bruise that would not fade. I thought of Matteo, his big brown eyes asking if we were okay, if Mommy was happy. I thought of my mother's hands, calloused from cleaning other people's homes, whispering to me that one day we'd have more. And here I was, reduced to nothing in front of people who measured worth in menus and mockery. When I walked away from the table, tray in hand, I caught my reflection in the mirror by the bar. For a moment I didn't recognize myself. The tired eyes, the forced smile, the woman surviving on scraps of dignity. But then, just for a flicker, I saw something else. Something in my own gaze that Celeste hadn't intended to awaken. It wasn't defeat. It was fire. I didn't know then how close I already was to Victor Hale's empire. I didn't know the letters waiting for me at home. The inheritance sealed in my mother's handwriting. The storm about to break. All I knew was this. Celeste Marrow had declared war on me in front of a chandeliered audience. She thought she'd won, but the war wasn't over. Not even close. The subway screeched into Queens like it was tearing itself apart. I leaned against the window, uniform still smelling faintly of wine and fried garlic, the laughter from that table still circling my head like vultures. Do you tell them to aim high, or do you tell them to get comfortable in uniforms and aprons like their mother? Celeste's voice, smooth and poisonous, replayed on a loop. I pressed my fingers to my temple, as if I could physically push her out. But humiliation doesn't leave that easily. It lingers, seeps into your bones. The train jolted. My reflection flickered in the glass, tired eyes, hair pulled back too tight, lipstick faded. I barely looked like the woman I imagined myself to be at 20. I had been going to college then. I had dreams of journalism, of digging into truths no one wanted told, and now I carried trays for billionaires and let their girlfriends slice me open for sport. When I finally climbed the narrow stairs to my apartment, the door greeted me with its usual groan. Inside, the living room was dim except for the warm glow of the fish tank in the corner. Matteo had begged for those guppies, promised he'd feed them every day. To his credit, he almost always remembered. Mom? His small voice floated from the bedroom. He was supposed to be asleep, but he always waited up. He was 8 going on 80, worried, thoughtful, too old for his years. I dropped my bag, softened my voice. Yeah, baby. I'm home. He padded into the hallway in his pajamas, hair sticking up like he'd been tossing in bed. How was work? The question stung. I wanted to say it was fine, that I'd smiled, carried plates, and made enough tips to keep us afloat another week. But the truth pressed heavy on my tongue. Instead, I crouched down and kissed the top of his head. Work was work. Did you brush your teeth? He groaned. Yes. Then he studied my face, too perceptive. You're upset. Children know. They always know. I'm just tired, I lied. Want me to make you tea? Like Abuela used to? His eyes shone with hope, as if his little act of kindness could repair me. That broke me more than Celeste's words ever could. I pulled him into a hug. No, mi cielo. Just go to sleep. Tomorrow's school. After I tucked him in, I lingered at his bedside longer than I should have. Watching his chest rise and fall, I thought of Celeste's sneer. Do you even tuck them in? The cruelty of it burned hot in my chest. I kissed Matteo's forehead and whispered, You'll never know the kind of hunger I knew. I promise. In the kitchen, I poured a glass of tap water, but my hands were shaking so badly the glass clinked against the counter. I thought of my mother, of her bent back and swollen fingers after long days cleaning office buildings, of her quiet endurance when my father slammed doors and shouted about wasted money. I thought of the last fight we'd had, me angry, her trying to tell me something important, me too impatient to listen. Mommy, I don't need your old secrets. I just need rent money. Those had been my last words before the cancer took her voice. Then her breath, the guilt never softened, and then, as if conjured by memory, I saw it, the envelope. It had been sitting on top of the fridge for weeks, wedged between Matteo's math worksheets and a pile of unpaid bills. My mother's handwriting across the front. Para Julia. I had avoided it, the way you avoid doctors or mirrors when you're afraid of the truth. But tonight Celeste's words made it impossible to ignore. Hands trembling, I slid it open. Inside was a letter, folded, yellowed slightly at the edges, and a crisp manila document. The letter was short. My mother's script looped delicately, though the ink smudged in places as if her hand had shaken. Mihija, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. There are things I could not tell you while alive. Things too dangerous, too complicated. But you must know now you are not invisible. You are not powerless. Enclosed is proof of what belongs to you, your bloodline, your inheritance. Use it wisely, and forgive me for keeping it from you. My throat closed up. Tears blurred the ink. The second document was official, legal. I unfolded it carefully. Words leapt out at me. Hale Industries. Shareholder, 21%. Beneficiary Julia Reyes. I froze. Hale Industries, Victor Hale's empire. My breath came in short, ragged bursts. It didn't make sense. My mother. How could she possibly be connected to the billionaire whose girlfriend had shredded me tonight? I read and reread the pages, trying to piece it together. My mother had once worked as a secretary in Midtown. I knew that much. She had disappeared for months once when I was little, claiming she was visiting family. Had she been tied to Hale back then? Was I? The question spiraled too large for my tired brain. But one truth pulsed like a drumbeat. I was not powerless. The humiliation I'd endured tonight wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, letter trembling in my hands, and whispered to myself, "They don't know who they hurt." Behind me, the fish swam lazily under their artificial light. In the other room, Mateo slept safe, oblivious, and for the first time in years I felt something other than exhaustion. I felt the seed of revenge, not petty revenge, not slaps of sarcasm or eye rolls behind closed doors. Something bigger, something that could crack glass towers and bring billionaires to their knees. I slid the letter back into its envelope and tucked it into my bag. Tomorrow I would call the lawyer listed on the document. Tomorrow I would start asking questions my mother never answered. But tonight I let myself stand in the ruins of who I had been. The waitress, the humiliated, the powerless. And I let the new version of myself breathe for the first time. The lawyer's office smelled like polished wood and old secrets. Heavy shelves lined with leather-bound case law rose behind the desk, their spines untouched, more decoration than utility. The blinds were drawn halfway, letting in stripes of morning light that made the room feel like a cage. I clutched the envelope against my chest, as if my mother's handwriting could protect me from what was coming. Across from me, Arthur Klein adjusted his glasses, the kind of man who carried authority the way other men carried wallets. He didn't need to shout. His silences did the work. "So," he began, his voice low, deliberate. "You opened the envelope." My throat was tight, but I nodded. "It says I'm a shareholder." Klein steepled his fingers. "Not just a shareholder, a significant one. 21% of Hale Industries." The words still sounded unreal, like dialogue from a show I had no business starring in. "That can't be right," I said, shaking my head. "I'm a waitress. I rent an apartment with peeling paint. You don't look like Power?" His tone wasn't cruel, but it cut anyway. "Power doesn't always look the part, Ms. Reyes. Sometimes it hides in plain sight." I shifted in the chair, heat prickling at my neck. "Explain, please." Klein leaned back, studying me with something between pity and curiosity. "Your mother, Sophia Reyes, was once involved with Richard Hale. Not Victor, the father. Richard co-founded Hale Industries in the late 70s. They had a relationship. Discreet, of course. She was young, ambitious, working as his secretary. But when she became pregnant with you, the situation grew complicated. The air left my lungs. My hands gripped the armrests until my knuckles whitened. "You're saying Richard Hale is my father?" Klein paused. "Yes, legally it was never acknowledged. Publicly it was buried. But privately, your mother kept documentation. DNA tests, correspondence, agreements that were never filed in court. She was thorough." My stomach turned. Memories of my childhood flooded back. My mother's absences, her unexplained money that would appear sometimes, then vanish. Her warnings not to ask questions she never told me. I whispered. "She was protecting you," Klein said softly. "From the Hales, from the scrutiny, from becoming a pawn in their games. But when Richard passed, and later when Sophia prepared for her own passing, she ensured you were not left with nothing. Her estate transferred her shares, his shares, to you." I stared at the document spread across his desk, black ink on ivory paper. each signature like a ghost. "I don't want this," I said suddenly, the panic rising. "I didn't ask for it." Klein's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "No one asks for legacy. It's given, or in your case hidden then revealed." I pressed my palms against my thighs, grounding myself. "If what you're saying is true, then Victor Hale, he has no idea who I am." "Not yet." Klein adjusted his glasses again, eyes glinting. "But when you step into that boardroom, Ms. Reyes, they will know. 21% gives you veto power, influence, a voice they cannot ignore." The idea was absurd. Me sitting across from men in suits who thought of me only as background noise at their expensive dinners. Me, wielding the kind of power they respected only in themselves. "They'll destroy me," I said quietly. "Perhaps," Klein allowed, "but they cannot erase you. Not anymore. You are by blood and by law part of Hale Industries Foundation. And the question is, do you want to claim it?" I thought of Celeste's laugh, the way her eyes had pierced me like a blade. "Do you tell them to aim high, or do you tell them to get comfortable in uniforms and aprons like their mother?" My pulse quickened. Mateo's face flashed in my mind the way he'd asked if I was upset. His tiny offer of tea as if he could heal wounds he didn't understand. I leaned forward. What would claiming it mean? Step by step. Klein pulled a folder from his desk drawer, sliding it toward me. Inside were financial reports, flowcharts, names. It would mean attending board meetings, casting votes, demanding accountability, and should you choose, making enemies. "Enemies I already have," I muttered. He arched a brow. "More powerful ones." I flipped through the folder, though the numbers blurred together. Revenues, assets, holdings. Entire skyscrapers, shipping routes, investment arms. All tied to a name I'd only ever seen on buildings and now tied to me. "I'm not like them," I said finally, voice breaking. "I don't know how to play these games." Klein studied me for a long moment, then said, "Perhaps that is your greatest strength. They underestimate you. They always will until you prove them wrong." I swallowed hard. The envelope felt heavier in my lap, as if it carried not just papers but destiny. "Tell me the truth," I said, almost a whisper. "If my mother kept this secret, if she hid me from Richard Hale's world, why now? Why give it to me now?" Klein's gaze softened. "Because she believed in timing, and because, Julia, she knew one day you would need to know you are not small." Something broke inside me then, but not in the way it had at the dinner table. This break was different. A crack that let light in, painful and blinding, but light nonetheless. I wiped my eyes quickly, ashamed of the tears. "So what do I do?" "You decide who you are," Klein said. "A waitress? Or a shareholder? Invisible? Or undeniable?" The room went silent, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full of possibility. I looked down at the letter again, my mother's handwriting steady even as her body had been failing. "You are not powerless." For years I had carried trays, swallowed insults, endured small humiliations because survival left no room for pride. But here was proof that I was more than what the world saw. I was Hale blood, and if I dared, I could use that bloodline like a weapon. I closed the folder, lifted my chin, and met Klein's gaze. "Show me how." The building rose like a blade into the Manhattan sky, Hale Industries etched in steel letters across its glass facade. I stood on the sidewalk far longer than I should have, clutching my bag like a shield, watching my reflection in those pristine windows. I looked small, out of place. A waitress in borrowed heels. "You are not powerless." My mother's words, her handwriting, echoed like a drumbeat. I forced myself forward. The marble lobby gleamed, all white stone and sharp edges, the kind of place designed to make visitors feel insignificant. Men in tailored suits breezed past me, their shoes clicking with authority. Women in pencil skirts carried files and phones, eyes locked straight ahead. No one looked twice at me. That was an advantage, I told myself. Being overlooked, the receptionist raised a perfectly drawn eyebrow when I gave my name. "Do you have an appointment, Ms. Reyes?" "Tell them," I said, steadying my voice, "that I'm here as a shareholder." Her expression flickered, a momentary crack before she tapped her headset and murmured into the mic. Minutes later, a junior associate with nervous eyes appeared, asked me to follow, and led me to the elevator. My heartbeat thundered with each floor we climbed. When the doors opened, the air was different, heavier, colder. The boardroom stretched long and wide, walls lined with glass that framed the skyline like a painting. At the far end sat Victor Hale, silver hair combed immaculately, posture regal. To his right, Celeste. She wore a crimson suit that matched her lipstick, her smile sharp and confident. Around the table, a dozen men and 2 women in suits shuffled papers, checking watches, exuding impatience. When I entered, every head turned. The silence was immediate, oppressive. Victor didn't bother to hide his confusion. Who is this? I walked to the end of the table, my heels clicking against the polished floor. My palms were sweating inside my bag. I set it down carefully before meeting his gaze. My name is Julia Reyes, I said, voice trembling at first but growing firmer. I'm here as a shareholder. Laughter broke around the table. Derisive, sharp. One of the men, thick-necked and red-faced, actually slapped the table. Celeste tilted her head, smiling sweetly as if she'd been handed dessert. A shareholder? She purred. Darling, I think you've confused stock options with shopping coupons. The laughter rose again. Heat crawled up my neck, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. I slid the documents from my bag and placed them on the table, pushing them toward Victor. These are the transfer papers from Sophia Reyes, my mother, Richard Hale's partner. His shares are now mine, 21%. The laughter stopped. Victor's face froze, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the shadow beneath. He snatched up the papers, eyes scanning the signatures. The room held its breath. This is impossible, one of the board members muttered. She can't. But Victor's expression told the truth. His jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening around the pages. Celeste leaned closer, trying to read over his shoulder, her smirk faltering. What is it? Victor didn't answer her. His eyes lifted slowly to mine, and for the first time I saw something other than arrogance there. Recognition, rage, fear. Who the hell do you think you are? He demanded, voice low, dangerous. I forced myself not to look away. My pulse hammered, but my words came clear. Your partner's daughter, and now your partner by law. I have every right to sit at this table. Murmurs erupted, board members shifting uncomfortably. One older woman cleared her throat. If the documentation is valid, it's valid, Victor snapped. He tossed the papers onto the table as if they burned his hands. Celeste's laugh was thin, brittle. You can't be serious. She's a waitress. I saw her myself. She took my order. She poured my wine. Her words cut, but I didn't let them see the wound. I straightened, lifting my chin. And you humiliated me. Remember? I let the silence linger, each second tightening the air. Maybe you should have been more careful with your words. Celeste's face flushed, but she masked it with another smirk. This is absurd. One of the men cleared his throat. If she holds 21%, she has veto power. Influence over major decisions. Influence? Celeste scoffed. She doesn't even know what EBITDA means. She'll embarrass us. I leaned forward, voice calm but cutting. Embarrassment is underestimating someone who has more control than you thought. I don't need to know every acronym today. What I need is recognition of my seat, which by law you can't deny. The room went still. Victor stared at me, his jaw working as if he were chewing glass. Then slowly he leaned back in his chair. Fine, he said. You want your seat? You have it. But understand this, Ms. Reyes. This is not a place for the faint-hearted. You will be eaten alive. I felt the weight of every eye in the room. My hands trembled under the table, but my face remained still, expressionless. I've been surviving all my life, I said. I'm harder to swallow than you think. The silence that followed was electric. Celeste broke it with a sharp laugh, though it rang hollow now. Enjoy your little victory, waitress. It won't last, I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I sat down, sliding into the chair across from Victor, feeling the leather mold to my body. The room shifted around me, recalibrating, as if the ghost of Richard Hale himself had walked in. Inside, my stomach churned. Fear gnawed at me. Doubt whispered I was out of my depth. But beneath it all, stronger than the fear, was something new. Belonging. I was no longer serving the table. I was sitting at it, and for the first time, they knew my name. The headline screamed from the newsstand before I even saw the picture. Waitress to heiress. Julia Reyes crashes Billionaire's boardroom. My own face stared back at me in grainy, paparazzi capture, eyes wide, hair pulled back too tight, lips pressed into a line that looked both terrified and defiant. They hadn't even bothered to pick a flattering shot. No, this was deliberate. The picture said, "She doesn't belong here." I turned away quickly, but the newsstand vendor chuckled under his breath. Hell of a story, huh? I didn't answer. I pulled Mateo's hood tighter over his head and steered him faster down the sidewalk toward school. But it didn't matter. The whispers followed anyway. Is that her? The Hale girl? Single mom, right? From Queens. Every step was a gauntlet. Mom, Mateo whispered, clutching my hand. Why are they staring? Because they're nosy, I said softly. Ignore them, baby. Just walk. But by the time we reached the school gates, 2 kids had already pointed. One laughed loud enough for Mateo to hear. Her mom's the maid for rich people. Mateo's shoulders stiffened. He let go of my hand and bolted inside. The wound was instant, sharper than Celeste's insults, sharper than the boardroom's laughter. Because it wasn't just me they were targeting anymore. It was my son. By noon, the tabloids had multiplied. My phone buzzed endlessly with unknown numbers. A headline lit up the cracked screen. Love child of Hale Empire. Mystery daughter surfaces, love child. The words felt dirty, like someone had reached into my childhood and smeared it with mud. Another alert. Who is Julia Reyes? 5 things to know. I clicked against my better judgment. Former waitress at Manhattan's Gramercy Room, single mother to an 8-year-old boy, grew up in Queens. Daughter of Sophia Reyes, a secretary. No college degree. Abandoned journalism classes. Known for financial struggles. Eviction notice filed in 2019. They had scraped my life bare, turned my survival into shame. When I shut the phone off, the apartment felt too small, too loud. The fish tank hummed. Traffic screamed through the window. My own heartbeat thundered like it wanted out of my chest. I called Arthur Klein. You said they'd come after me, I said, voice trembling. You didn't say it would be like this. Klein's sigh crackled over the line. This is their weapon of choice, Julia. Discredit, humiliate, isolate. They will make you want to disappear before they even need to fight you. Well, it's working. I pressed my forehead against the cool window pane. Outside, people walked free of my name. My son was mocked at school today. He's 8, Arthur, 8. His silence stretched then. You can walk away. Sell your shares, take the money, disappear. It's an option. The suggestion landed like betrayal. That's what they want, isn't it? For me to cash out and crawl back into the shadows. Yes, his tone sharpened. And that is why you can't. If you want to win, you stay. You let them underestimate you. Then you strike. The word curled inside me, dangerous and tempting. 2 days later, the Whisper campaign began. It started small. Anonymous Twitter accounts calling me a fraud, a gold digger, an opportunist. Then it spread. Podcasts, gossip columns, even a segment on morning TV. Each voice layered over the next, weaving a narrative. Julia Reyes doesn't deserve her shares. Julia Reyes is unfit. Julia Reyes is trash dressed in silk. At first I thought it was organic, the natural cruelty of a hungry media. But then a message reached me through a friend still working at the Gramercy Room. Celeste was in here last night, loud enough for everyone to hear. She said you were unstable. That you'd been fired before for episodes. She's planting stories, Julia. She's the one pulling the strings. I sat on the edge of my bed, rage thrumming through my veins. Celeste's painted smile flashed in my mind. Her laugh. Her mockery. Now she was rewriting me in the public eye, stripping me of dignity one whisper at a time. That night when I tucked Mateo in, he looked at me with wide, worried eyes. Mom, are we in trouble? My throat tightened. Why would you think that? Kids at school said you stole money. That's why we live here now. His voice cracked. Did you? I sat down beside him, pulling him close. No, mi cielo. I didn't steal anything. People lie when they're afraid. And they're afraid of me now. He blinked up at me, confused. Why would anyone be afraid of you? I stroked his hair, swallowing the bitter truth. Because I remind them that power can come from places they don't respect. Because I survived what they couldn't. Aloud, I only said, because they know I'm not going away. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, exhaustion etched into every line of my face. For years, I had looked at myself with resignation. This is what survival looks like. But now, under the glare of public scrutiny, something else stared back at me. A hardness. Celeste wanted me humiliated. Victor wanted me erased. The board wanted me discredited. Fine, let them. But I would not stay the victim in their story. I would write my own. I pressed both palms against the sink, leaning close to my reflection. They'll regret underestimating me. I whispered. The woman in the mirror didn't look away this time. She almost smiled. The boardroom was colder that morning, or maybe it was just me. The suits talked in circles, numbers, strategies, forecasts, but I was learning to sit still, to listen, to let them forget I was even there until I spoke. And when I did, they shifted in their chairs. Not because I said something brilliant, not yet, but because my 21% was a loaded gun on the table, and they couldn't ignore it. After the meeting, Daniel Mercer lingered. He was one of the younger board members. Late 40s, clean-cut, expensive watch, but not ostentatious. He had a kind smile, the kind that seemed rare in this building. "You're doing well," he said, falling into step beside me. "Don't let them rattle you. They've been in their little circle for decades. Anyone new is a threat." I searched his face for mockery but found none. "I'm sure I sound like an idiot half the time." He shook his head. "No, you sound like someone who's learning, and that's dangerous for them. Once you understand how this place runs, you'll realize how much power you have." His words were exactly what I wanted to believe. Over the next weeks, Daniel became my ally. He explained acronyms, decoded financial reports, even warned me about which board members were loyal to Victor and which only to themselves. He spoke in low tones after meetings, steady and reassuring. "You don't have to do this alone, Julia," he said once, sliding a coffee across the table toward me. "You have me, and God, I wanted that to be true." After the tabloids, after Celeste's whispers, after seeing Mateo shrink under the weight of schoolyard rumors, I needed someone in my corner. For the first time since the envelope, I let myself believe I wasn't drowning. The illusion shattered on a rainy Thursday. I was leaving the office late, the city lights blurred by wet glass. My phone buzzed, an unknown number again. Normally I would have ignored it, but something made me answer. "Julia?" The voice was nervous, rushed. "It's Maria. We used to work together at the Gramercy room." I blinked. "Maria? Oh my God, it's been no time. Listen, I heard something tonight." I was covering a private dinner at the Four Seasons. Celeste was there. With Daniel Mercer, my stomach dropped. "Daniel?" "Yes, and Julia." He was feeding her information. "Your schedule, your lawyer's name, even things about your son." The street tilted under me. Rain slid down my face, but it wasn't the rain making me cold. Maria's voice tightened. "He said you trust him." He laughed about it. "Celeste called you pathetic for thinking you had an ally." The line crackled. I leaned against a lamppost to stay upright. "You're sure?" I whispered. "I wish I wasn't." "Be careful, Julia. They're playing with knives." The call ended. I stood frozen, the city roaring around me. Horns blared, people pushed past, but all I could hear was Celeste's laughter echoing in my head. Pathetic. Daniel's smile flashed through my mind. The coffee, the explanations, the encouragement. All poisoned now. Every word a lie. Every kindness a trap. By the time I reached home, I was shaking. Mateo was already asleep, his backpack on the floor, a half-finished science project on the table. I collapsed onto the couch, buried my face in my hands, and sobbed. Not the quiet tears of exhaustion. The gut-wrenching, body-shaking sobs of betrayal. I thought of selling the shares. Of taking Mateo somewhere far away. California, maybe. We could live small but safe. No headlines. No whispers. No boardroom wars. Safety sounded like heaven. But then, a small voice. "Mom?" I looked up. Mateo stood in the hallway, rubbing his eyes. He padded over, climbed into my lap without asking, and wrapped his little arms around my neck. "What's wrong?" He mumbled. I couldn't answer. My throat was raw. He leaned back, eyes half closed. "Are we safe now?" The words pierced deeper than Celeste's cruelty, deeper than Daniel's betrayal. Safe. That's what he wanted. Not money, not power, just safety. I smoothed his hair back, swallowing the lump in my throat. "We will be," I whispered. "I promise." When he drifted back to sleep, I sat in the dark, rocking him like I used to when he was a baby. His breath was steady against my shoulder. Mine wasn't, because I realized safety wouldn't come from running. Safety wouldn't come from surrender. Safety would only come from ending this war. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom with eyes still swollen but a spine of steel. Daniel greeted me with his usual warm smile. "Rough night?" I looked at him for a long moment. The man I thought was my ally. The man who had handed me betrayal wrapped in kindness. My lips curved in something that almost resembled a smile. "Nothing I can't handle," I said softly. His grin widened, oblivious, and in that moment I knew I would not just survive him, I would destroy him. For the first time, the thought of revenge didn't feel like fire burning me alive. It felt cold, sharp, calculated. I took my seat, folded my hands, and stared at the men around me. They thought they were circling prey, but they hadn't realized yet prey learns, prey adapts, and sometimes prey grows teeth. The first time I opened the folder, I thought Arthur was exaggerating. "This," he said, sliding the thick file across his desk, "is a skeleton graveyard, and Victor's been dancing on the bones for years." I didn't want to touch it. Pages thick with numbers, accounts, wire transfers, nothing about it looked human. But Arthur's eyes, sharp behind his glasses, told me the story lived between the lines. "Explain it to me like I'm 5, I said, pulling the folder closer. Arthur leaned back. "Victor and Celeste have been funneling company profits offshore. Shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, Panama, Liechtenstein. Standard laundering tactics, but what's damning is how they moved employee pension funds into those accounts. Not profits, Julia. Workers' money." My chest tightened. "Workers like..." Arthur's gaze softened. "Like your mother. She spent 30 years at Hale Industries. Every paycheck a little carved off for retirement. That's what Victor stole." I flipped a page. My mother's name jumped out, buried in a list of pensioners whose funds had been rerouted. Sophia Reyes, balance, 0. It felt like glass shattering behind my ribs. I whispered, "He stole from her even when she was dying." Arthur said nothing. He didn't need to. I pressed the paper flat with trembling hands. Rage hummed in my blood, hot and electric. Celeste's insults, Daniel's betrayal, the headlines, all of it shrank to shadows behind this revelation. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. This was desecration. My mother had scrubbed Victor's empire clean, typing letters, balancing books, filing paperwork late into the night. She had given her life to this company. And when she needed it most, her pension, her dignity, Victor had siphoned it into his own pockets. "Tell me we can prove it," I said, my voice low, dangerous. Arthur smiled grimly. "We can. The paper trail is sloppy. They thought no one would look. We just need leverage, someone inside willing to corroborate." That night I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread like a battlefield. Mateo was asleep, his steady breathing drifting from the bedroom. The apartment smelled faintly of laundry detergent and crayons. Normal life pressed against the edges of my fury. I picked up my mother's photograph, her younger self, hair pinned back, tired smile, and set it atop the file. "Did you know?" I whispered. "Did you know what they were doing to you?" Of course she had. My mother always knew more than she said. But she'd chosen silence. I didn't have that luxury anymore. Arthur arranged a meeting with a potential informant, someone in Victor's financial department. We met in a dingy cafe in Brooklyn, far from the gleaming towers of Midtown. The man's name was Samuel Grant, mid-50s, with sweat beading at his temples despite the cold. He stirred his coffee without drinking it. "I shouldn't be here," he muttered. "If Victor finds out, he won't," I cut in. My voice was steadier than I felt. "I just need the truth." Samuel glanced at Arthur, then back at me. "The truth is, Victor runs this company like a mob boss. You don't cross him. Celeste is worse. She knows where the money is buried, and she enjoys holding it over people. I've seen pensions vanish, whole departments gutted. And the books? Faked 6 ways to Sunday. Can you prove it?" His hands shook. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a flash drive, and slid it across the table. Payroll records, wire transfers, emails, enough to burn the whole empire down. I didn't touch it at first. The tiny object felt radioactive, dangerous. But when I finally closed my hand around it, something shifted inside me. It was no longer just about surviving their games. It was about justice, not polite justice. Not settlement money or quiet apologies. Justice like fire. 2 nights later, I sat in the dark staring at my laptop screen. The files opened like a confession. Names, numbers, signatures. I saw my mother's pension listed again alongside hundreds of others. Retirees whose lives had been siphoned dry. Janitors, secretaries, line workers. The unseen army who had built Victor's empire, and there, buried in the data, a note scribbled in the margin of a scanned document. S. Reyes, transfer approved. He had signed off on it himself. Victor Hale's signature. That was when the grief cracked open into rage so sharp I could taste it. "Mom," I whispered, staring at her photo beside the screen. "I'll make him answer for this." Mateo's footsteps startled me. He padded into the living room, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, you're still working?" I closed the laptop quickly. "Yeah, baby. Just a little longer." He climbed onto my lap, his small body warm against mine. "You look mad." "I am," I admitted. "Because of those people?" "Yes," he tilted his head. "Are you going to beat them?" I smiled faintly, kissing his hair. "I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to make sure they can never hurt us or anyone like us again." He yawned, satisfied, and fell asleep against my chest. I held him tighter, the flash drive still burning in my pocket. The next board meeting was a blur of smug voices and false smiles. Victor presided like a king, Celeste radiant at his side, dripping jewels. "Revenue projections remain strong," Victor said, gesturing at the screen. "Our offshore holdings are secure and I almost laughed out loud. Offshore holdings? He was bragging about the very crimes I now had in my possession. Daniel smirked at me from across the table. I met his eyes, let him see nothing but calm. Let them all think I was cornered, humiliated, weak. Inside, though, the fury had crystallized into something stronger than fear. I wasn't prey anymore, I was the hunter, and this time, I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for my mother, for every worker they had robbed. For Mateo's future, the war had always been theirs. But now it was mine. The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and nerves. Reporters crowded the back rows, cameras flashing before the judge barked for order. Every seat was filled, the air thick with whispers. The waitress turned heiress. The billionaire and his mistress, the empire at stake. Victor sat at the defense table, stone-faced in a tailored suit, silver hair gleaming. Celeste glittered beside him in pearls as if this were a gala, not a trial. Their lawyers, 3 of them, looked carved from marble. And then there was me. I smoothed the wrinkles from my thrift store blazer and clutched Arthur's arm like a lifeline. "Breathe," he whispered. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one about to bleed on the stand. The prosecution called me after 2 days of dry testimony. Financial analysts, auditors, paper trails. Necessary but lifeless. The case needed a heartbeat. And apparently I was it. "Ms. Reyes," the prosecutor began as I took the stand. "Could you tell the court a little about yourself?" My voice caught. Microphones amplified even the smallest tremor. I forced myself to meet the jury's eyes. "My name is Julia Reyes. I'm a single mother. I used to be a waitress at the Gramercy Room in Manhattan." A murmur rippled through the gallery. They all knew, but hearing me say it made it real. "And how did you become involved in this case?" I told them about the envelope, my mother's death, the shares, the shock of walking into that boardroom. I kept my words plain, my tone steady. No embellishments, just truth. The prosecutor led me carefully through the evidence Samuel had provided, the missing pensions, the shell companies, Victor's signature. My hands trembled as I pointed to documents displayed on the screen. "This is my mother's name," I said softly, the courtroom leaning closer. "She worked 30 years at Hale Industries. She thought her pension would keep her safe. Instead, it was stolen." I swallowed hard. Stolen by them. I didn't need to point at Victor and Celeste. Every juror's eyes flicked to them anyway. Then came the defense. Victor's lead attorney rose. Smooth as silk, smile sharp as a knife. "Ms. Reyes," he purred. "You said you were a waitress before all this?" "Yes. And you struggled financially, didn't you?" "Eviction notices, debts?" I stiffened. "Yes. So you're familiar with desperation. With doing whatever it takes to survive." Arthur shot to his feet. "Objection." The judge overruled. The lawyer circled me like a shark. "Wouldn't it be fair to say, Ms. Reyes, that you have a vested interest in painting my client as a villain? That destroying him benefits you, financially, socially?" I met his gaze. "Destroying him doesn't bring my mother back. It doesn't erase the years I worked double shifts to feed my son. But telling the truth, that's all I have left." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. He regrouped quickly. "You're emotional, understandable, but emotion isn't evidence. You admit you didn't discover these alleged transfers yourself. You relied on others. Isn't it possible you've been manipulated? The jury shifted uneasily. I clenched the edge of the witness stand. I may not be an accountant. I may not wear $1,000 suits. But I know what it feels like to lose everything because people like Victor think no one will notice. I noticed. The lawyer smirked. That's a nice speech, Ms. Reyes, but you're not on trial for your feelings. You're here because you want power. Isn't that the truth? Something inside me snapped. I leaned forward, voice shaking but loud enough to fill the room. You want the truth? I never wanted any of this. I wanted to raise my son in peace. But your clients took that from me when they mocked me, when they stole from my mother, when they tried to break me. If that's power, standing up here telling you what they did, then yes. I want it, the gallery erupted. The judge slammed his gavel for silence. But the jury, they were listening now. Cross-examination dragged on, each question a twist of the knife. They called me unstable, unqualified, even irresponsible as a mother. At one point, the lawyer sneered, "If you're such a victim, Ms. Reyes, why didn't you walk away? Why stay?" I locked eyes with him. Because my son asked me if we were safe, and I realized the only way to keep him safe was to stop people like your client, to make sure they can't hurt anyone else's family. For the first time, the jury looked at me not as a scandal, but as a mother. By the time I stepped down, my knees nearly buckled. Arthur steadied me. "You did it," he whispered. "I don't know," I muttered. My voice was raw. My heart pounded. But when I glanced at the jury, I saw something shift. Doubt in their eyes, yes, but also empathy. They weren't just weighing numbers anymore. They were weighing me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the window, city lights flickering like restless thoughts. Mateo stirred, wandered out in his pajamas, and curled up beside me. "Did you beat them?" he asked sleepily. I brushed his hair back. "Not yet, but I think they heard me." He smiled faintly, drifting off again. And I realized maybe that was victory already. Because for the first time, the silence around Victor and Celeste had cracked. For the first time, people were listening to someone like me. And once they listened, there was no going back. The courtroom had become a stage, and Celeste loved an audience. She strode to the witness stand like a starlet, silk blouse cut low, diamonds winking under the fluorescent lights. The jury shifted, some enthralled, some unimpressed. Celeste flashed her signature smile, the one I'd seen across a restaurant table the night she humiliated me. But charm doesn't hold against paper trails. The prosecutor's questions cut sharp, each one tied to the documents Samuel had unearthed. "Ms. Marchand, is this your signature authorizing the transfer of $1.2 million into a Cayman Islands account?" She tilted her chin. "I sign what Victor gives me. I don't read the fine print." A ripple of disbelief passed through the jury. "Are you telling us you willingly signed documents moving millions of dollars without knowing what they were?" Her lips parted, but the pause was fatal. That's not unusual in this industry. Even Victor's lawyers stiffened. When the defense took over, Celeste tried to spin herself into a victim. "Victor controls everything," she said dramatically. "I only did what he asked." I was scared. It was a clever tactic if she could appear coerced. Maybe she'd escape the worst of it. But vanity is a dangerous ally. Pressed further, Celeste leaned too hard on her performance. "I was indispensable to Hale Industries," she bragged. "Victor couldn't make a move without me. I handled his secrets, his accounts. He trusted me with everything." The courtroom went still. The prosecutor pounced. "So, Ms. Marchand, just minutes ago you claimed you were an uninformed bystander. But now you're admitting you handled Victor Hale's secrets and accounts personally?" Celeste blinked. Realization flickered in her eyes. She tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. The jury saw it. So did Victor. His jaw tightened, his fingers digging into the defense table. For the first time since this began, Celeste looked uncertain. Victor's own testimony sealed it. He was colder than Celeste, less flamboyant, but arrogance leaked from every word. "I built Hale Industries from the ground up," he said. This is a witch hunt fueled by greed. My so-called daughter is nothing but an opportunist." The word daughter landed heavy. He spat it out like a curse. I stared at him from the gallery, pulse hammering. He wanted to reduce me back to nothing, back to the waitress who didn't belong. But the documents, the witnesses, the pension theft, truth clung to him like rot. When cross-examined, Victor snapped. You think I care about a few pensions? Pennies in the scope of an empire. Without me, none of those people would have jobs at all. The gasp in the courtroom was audible. Even the judge's gavel couldn't erase it. Victor Hale, titan of industry, had revealed himself at last, not a visionary, not a leader, but a predator who believed exploitation was his right. The verdict came faster than anyone expected. Guilty on multiple counts of fraud. Embezzlement conspiracy. Celeste was named complicit. Her assets frozen alongside Victor's. She slumped in her chair, makeup streaked, diamonds suddenly gaudy against her trembling skin. Victor only stared ahead, lips pressed into a thin line, as if refusing to acknowledge that the empire had crumbled beneath him. Reporters swarmed outside the courthouse. Microphones shoved in my face. How does it feel to win, Ms. Reyes? Do you think justice was served? What's next for you? Their voices blurred. Victory should have felt like fire, like triumph. Instead, it felt heavy, muted, like standing in the ruins of a war. Arthur guided me through the crowd, shielding me with his briefcase. Don't answer yet, he murmured. Let them speculate. Silence is power. But inside, silence felt like emptiness. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water I hadn't touched. The papers were already calling it the fall of the giants. Matteo climbed into my lap the same way he had on the darkest nights. Only this time his face was glowing. Mom, he said, eyes shining. Does this mean we're safe now? I hesitated, the weight of the word safe pressing into me. Yes, I said finally, brushing his hair back. We're safe. He hugged me tight. And in that embrace, for the first time, I felt something close to peace. But when he fell asleep against my shoulder, I stared at the wall, haunted because safety had cost something I couldn't get back. I had won. Victor and Celeste had fallen. The empire was mine to rebuild. Yet victory tasted hollow. Revenge didn't resurrect my mother. It didn't erase the shame, the fear, the years of scraping by. It only left me with power, and the question of what I would become with it. The boardroom was the same, but everything was different. The long mahogany table gleamed under the recessed lights. The skyline stretched beyond glass walls, a mosaic of steel and sky. Men in suits shuffled papers, cleared throats, waited for the meeting to begin. But for the first time, all eyes turned to me. I sat at the head of the table, not as an intruder, not as Victor's bastard or Celeste's target, not even as the waitress they once mocked. I sat as chairwoman. Arthur leaned close, murmuring, They'll test you. Every policy you propose will feel like a battle. Don't flinch, I didn't. My hand rested on a folder filled with plans. Not for empire, not for profit margins alone, but for people. For mothers like my own who gave everything to this company and were left with nothing. For workers whose hands built fortunes they'd never touch. I scanned the faces around me. Some looked nervous, some skeptical. A few begrudgingly respectful. And one or two, Daniel included, looked quietly furious. I welcomed it. Let them stew. This is the new Hale Industries, I began. My voice was calm, steady, but carried steel beneath it. We will not repeat the sins of the past. Effective immediately, we're establishing a transparent pension program. Audited quarterly, accessible to every employee. No more shadow accounts. No more theft, a rustle of whispers. Someone muttered, expensive. Yes, I said flatly, expensive. Integrity usually is. Over the following weeks, I pushed through policies they'd once sneered at. Paid parental leave, scholarships for employees' children, partnerships with community programs to lift up families like the one I came from. Every victory was a knife fight. Every vote cost me leverage, patience, hours of sleep. At night, I'd collapse into bed. Matteo curled beside me with his math homework, the television humming in the background. He'd ask, "How was work, Mom?" And I'd smile and say, "We're making progress." But when he was asleep, I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if I was building something new, or simply painting over the rot of something old. 3 months after the verdict, a reporter asked for an interview. "You've gone from waitress to one of the most powerful women in American business," she said, recorder poised. "What does power feel like?" I thought of my mother's pension statement, of Victor's sneer, of Celeste's diamonds clinking as she testified. "It feels heavy," I said finally, "like something you carry for others, not for yourself." The reporter looked surprised. Maybe she wanted a soundbite, not the truth. But the truth was all I had left. In the quiet moments, the ghosts lingered. Sometimes I'd walk past the conference room where Victor once ruled, and I'd hear his voice in memory, cold, dismissive, untouchable. Sometimes I'd catch Celeste's laughter in the echo of a gala photo flashing across the news. And sometimes, late at night, I'd remember myself in that restaurant, tray trembling in my hands, Celeste's words slicing me open. I hadn't erased that girl. She lived inside me still, watching from the shadows, reminding me of the line between humility and hubris. She kept me honest. She kept me afraid of becoming the very thing I had destroyed. At the next quarterly meeting, I presented the numbers. Profits were down, slightly, but employee retention was up. Productivity too. Workers were writing letters thanking the company for finally keeping promises. The board grumbled, but I held their gaze. Short-term loss, I said. Long-term trust. That's how empires survive, Daniel scoffed audibly. This isn't charity, Julia, it's business. You think the market cares about your sob stories? I leaned forward, voice cutting. The market didn't build this company. People did. And they deserve more than crumbs. Silence followed. Even Daniel didn't push further. For the first time, I felt the weight of authority settle not as a burden but as armor. After the meeting, Arthur caught up with me in the hallway. You're changing things, he said, but it won't last unless you harden yourself. You can't carry every worker on your shoulders. I know. I paused, looking out at the city. But if I don't, who will? Arthur sighed, almost smiling. Your mother would be proud. The words pierced deeper than I expected. I swallowed hard. She didn't get justice while she lived. But maybe this is as close as I can come. That night I tucked Mateo into bed. He looked up at me with those same wide eyes that had once asked, "Are we safe now?" "Mom," he said, yawning, "does everyone at your work like you now?" I laughed softly. "Not everyone. But that's not the point. What's the point?" I smoothed his blanket, kissed his forehead. "The point is they can't ignore me anymore." He smiled sleepily. "Good. They shouldn't." When he drifted off, I sat by the window, the city lights flickering like restless ghosts. Power had a price. I knew that now. It isolated. It consumed. It demanded silence where sometimes I wanted to scream. But silence had its own cost. My mother had paid it. I had paid it. I wasn't going to pay it again. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the empire press against me. Heavy, yes, but mine to carry. The waitress who had once been belittled now sat at the head of the table. And for better or worse, the world would remember my name.